Hello, hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining. I know it's not the most popular topic and it's not the most convenient time, but well, we're here, which is great. So we're having fun. Okay, so the new women over here, Hannah Senesh. There are several ways you can pronounce her name. She was originally from Hungary. But this is the way we know her. Let's say in this is the sort of an English-sized version of the way you would spell her name. And you see the years of her life. She lived only for 23 years, and she immigrated to Palestine, right? So the mandatory Palestine still was the British rule in only 1939, which was very late because starting from 1933, things would be going only from bad to worse for the Jews under because of Hitler and his power. And finally after she graduated from high school, she left Palestine. Her mother stayed in Hungary and didn't want to leave, but from really early age, and she got very good education, because in many religious families, sometimes girls wouldn't be given enough education. It was a very, I would say, in many patriarchal families, it was a bit tough for women, and we will talk about it. But she was given a good education, just as her brother, and she would start writing poems and stories and diaries, and really in her school years, from almost like first grade. And luckily, we have many of those writings collected. When she came to Palestine, she lived first in a kibbutz, in one of the oldest kibbutz in Israel, called Sdot Yam. So kibbutz is a sort of small socialistic camp, a community. And this is what be sort of the very first bricks in the foundation of the Jewish state, and how the people would organize themselves to ensure that the life was working and everything was functioning. So sort of this way. And of course, we have to keep in mind that those were very stormy years, and shortly after the Second World War started, so she volunteered in the army. Yes, she was one of those women. That's why I also mentioned the previous women, because their stories are so somehow interconnected. And here is the connection, right? So I'm trying to, make this patchwork to provide a bigger picture of like many portraits of women that actually made it possible for the Jewish state to exist eventually, and she was one of those women who volunteered to serve in the army. And at some point, she was contacted by the British Army, and she was hired sort of in the parachuting squad. And help those Jewish communities that stayed in Europe, that would be besieged, beleaguered in Europe. And she was sent to Hungary. Her mother, who had stayed in Hungary, right? She didn't make it to Palestine at that point. She hadn't made it. So she even didn't know that her daughter was somewhere in the bushes, in the forest, trying to somehow penetrate on the territory of Hungary, and the Nazis were everywhere. She was caught when they made it. Who are these children? So this is her brother and her. So this is Hannah Stanish and her brother. Yes, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned it. These are also them. So the Hannah Stanish and her brother. Yeah. So this is her in her early 20s, by the way, and she would die at the age of 23. Thank you for asking, Deborah. This is a very I should have said it, of course. And she was caught. And they knew she was from the parachute squad, and she wasn't the only one. And the Nazis wanted to know how many people were and how many people penetrated on the territory of Hungary, but she didn't say a word. She was put in prison, and in prison she would continue writing poems. And well, she would be making diary entry regularly, and after numerous tortures and interrogations, the Nazi police, well, and those who collaborated with the Nazis in Hungary, they call her mom for interrogation. And this is only when her mother, Catherine Sanish, learned that her daughter had been in Hungary for quite some time. And when she saw her daughter, and by the way, this is just one of the documents, right, on the immigration certificate of Anna Hannes, and as you see, there are different ways to spell it, and you see the year 39. So it was, well, a very lucky escape in fact. So in 39 it was already very difficult to leave Europe because because the Second World War sort of already started at that point. So things were getting really, really bad, from bad to worse. And she saw her daughter without the front teeth, with bruises all over her body, the bruises on her head. She was bleeding profusely. But she said, "Mom, I'm very sorry." Her mom was also kept in prison for a while, but she didn't give any name. Hannah didn't betray anyone from her squad. They were all part of the Palmach organization, sort of the paramilitary branch of the Haganah organization. That it was the organization sort of to protect the Jews on the territory of mandatory Palestine from the British, from the Arabs, from everywhere. So it was she didn't give away any name, and she would be executed. There was a firing squad. She was shot down by a firing squad, and her mom knew about it. She was kept in prison for some time, and then she was released, and she actually managed to stay alive. She was hiding, and in 1945, when the Soviet army came to liberate Hungary, well, she was free. Free, and she would immigrate to Palestine after that, shortly after the Jewish state would be born. But the memory of Hannah Senesh in Hungary, it's still there. And let me zoom it in for you. So there is this sort of memorial, and there is also the memory of this girl who didn't even see the Jewish state born, right? She died before that. But the memory of what she did, it still lives in culture, in the country, and nearly every school kid in Israel knows at least one very, very short poem that later on would be put to music. It's called Eli Eli. You have the translation, you even have the transliteration. It was written in Hebrew. And this song has been sung by so many singers, male, female, whatever. This is just 6 lines. Imagine the girl who knew she would die very soon, but still, having this faith and the will, and despite the fear, she really, really never, she never gave up. I'm not going to sing it. Regina Spektor is going to sing it for you. At least I hope that she will. Or maybe not. Yes, she will.
אלי, אלי, שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת של אדם, החול והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת של אדם.
That's it. So just the 6 lines, but they Well, we immediately feel the pain she felt and the hope she was full of that kept her going. Risa, your favorite poem by Hannah Senish, Blessed, is, oh, wow, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, she left the huge heritage. Luckily, her mother, she somehow got hold of many of the diaries. Some of the diaries actually were left in this Dot Yam kibbutz where she lived when in Palestine. Regina Spektor is great. She's an amazing singer and songwriter. She's one of my favorites. And well, there was even no music, just singing a cappella, just singing without any music. You can also even find it sang a cappella. You can find it in different styles. This song definitely has had an impact and probably will have. If you know the story, I mean, it's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing, Risa. I don't know that poem, and I'm trying to read some fiction literature, to read some poetry, or when I listen to a song that I kind of like, I try to read the lyrics and translate it, at least with Google Translate. It's it also sheds light on many aspects of the life in Israel at the time when it was written. It really helps you understand many things. Okay, so one more woman also, you see, she's in the military outfit. So yes, it's also connected with the army. But again, it wasn't my goal to talk about how many women actually fought at the war. But I mean, for every Jew, in a certain way, there is always a little bit of fight going on. Not only Jews, but since we're talking about the Jewish women, so yeah, obviously there's always some sort of fight going on. So Esther Arditi, one more outstanding Jewish woman who luckily lived a much longer life, which is fascinating, taking into account that she was actually in the front line, and she is the hero of Israel, of the IDF, of Israel Defense Force, and she was the Israeli medic. So of course, she was in the she helped with the medical side of things. But I will tell you the story of one of the act of heroism that she performed, and she was given the Medal of a Distinguished Service. And up until recently, she's been the only woman who is awarded this very, very high award, and all the other were men. So I believe it was a little bit of sexist in a way. I'm pretty sure there were many other women who did some great things, but anyway, this is how things are. So she was born in the 37, as you see, in Bulgaria, in Sofia. And luckily, she managed to, in her early school years, she managed to escape finally to Palestine again from, things were really getting rough in Eastern Europe. And later on, she would be even enlisted in the Israeli Air Force. And it's not about the Second World War. It would be later times, after the establishing of the Jewish state in the 1948. There will be a number of wars and military conflict happening. So it wasn't really life wasn't a bed of roses after the Jewish state was born. Those were really, really stormy years, and even nowadays, it's not that really peace and quiet as much as we wish it was. But anyway, and in 1954, there was an incident. So she saved a combat pilot. There is even a name, so Yaakov Solomon, and there was one more. He was a navigator, Shlomo Hertzman. There was an incident. It wasn't even a military operation. Their plane was struck by lightning. It tried to somehow land in the storm, but they were hit. And she was there. She was called for help. She was steering an ambulance car in the mud, in the rain, and she saw the plane that crashed well, not from the height. Of course, it was landing while it crashed, but she saw it was the light to strike it. She realized that there was a huge danger for explosion, but her car was stuck, and she had to run and crawl in the mud to the plane, because she knew there were at least two people there on board of the crashed plane. She didn't know if they were alive. She didn't know that she risked her life, but she ran to the smoking plane, and she managed to somehow take out the two men, one woman, from the plane before it would explode. And for this heroic for this heroism, she was awarded this medal, a highly distinguished medal from the IDF, from Israel Defense Force. And she also was there in the nursing units, in the medical units, in several wars that followed afterwards. And obviously, she is the role model for many women. I know, and a friend of mine told me that like at school they study this episode. They know of her at school. She's a big deal. But I wish more people knew about her outside Israel. So that's why I decided to talk about her. So this is someone that really matters a lot, and I believe that these stories should be told. Well, but again, as I told you, there is like some names might be familiar in certain communities, but let's say outside Israel, some names are really big deal in Israel, but they're not known in Jewish communities elsewhere. And it doesn't really matter if these women are Jewish or not. It just mattered because they did something for that they believed. They sacrificed some things for what they believed. They died for what they believed. So I believe in every country, in every culture, there are women that need to be told more. That's it. So for me, it's not even about being Jewish or about being Ukrainian or about being French or being American. It doesn't really matter. But since I'm in Israel, of course, I believe it's something that's about the Jewish women that we really need to talk about. Okay, so one more woman, Sarah Bavli. Luckily, she lived for almost a century. Yeah, women did have major role in history. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ladies, for these very encouraging words. And I'm happy to see some men here as well on this tour. And it's great. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, everyone. And I only managed to find one picture of Sarah Bavli, which is a shame. I think there are many others, but I only managed to find one. And Sarah Bavli, well, on the one hand, she's definitely a big, big deal, and she knew some of the women that I've already mentioned, even in the previous episodes, such as Henrietta Zold and the Hadassah organization, and Rebecca Fachiner as well. But with few women statues commemorating them. Thank you, Ronnie. Yes, indeed, this is right. There should be more women statues for sure. Well, anyway. So this is here. We are here to fix at least some of the issues that need to be brought up. On the other hand, she was always in a sort of a bit overshadowed by some leaders. Again, such as Henrietta Zold, for example. I'm not saying anything bad about Henrietta Zold, the one who established the Hadassah hospital and the organization that actually gave name to the hospital. But Sarah Bavli, who also got a very good education, she studied chemistry in Amsterdam. And she even got her master's degree. And then, well, luckily she managed to immigrate to Palestine before the atrocities in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, of the times of the Second World War. Of course, I'm talking about. And she managed to meet in Europe and then later on Palestine some of the women that I've just mentioned, and with her medical degree in chemistry, she started to work on the nutrition programs for the nurses, for the medical personnel, for children, for I think it's, yeah, for some reason the brightness, I don't know what happened really. Okay, I needed to add some more light to see it better. For the people who were the patients of the hospital and of the medical stations, because of course the Hadassah hospital would be established after the foundation of the state of Israel. Before that, there were just several like medical institutions scattered actually in a few cities, in the several cities of mandatory Palestine, such as in Haifa, for example. And of course, it was not enough. But you can imagine there was no country at that point, right? So there was a word called yeshuv, right? So which actually means a settlement, but it was sort of the common name for the small cities and kind of they were probably too big for communities, but still they would be too small to consider those communities sort of cities. But those towns and villages that would be established by the Jews, and they had to be protected also by those Jews, because of course, the British Army was not enough to ensure enough protection from the Arabs, and it was quite difficult. So they had to. That's why there was an organization called Haganah, right, to protect also the Israel, the Jewish settlements and the mandatory state. But there was still nothing was really functioning for the Jews, because there was no Jewish state, and things were really rough. And of course, so when the first medical sort of facilities would be established, like the small stations, they needed to not only just cure people, provide them the necessary treatment, but the nutrition. And when in the yeshuvs, in the kibbutzim, right, in this settlements, well, there were many children, and the way you feed them, the way what you give to them, what you cook and what you give to the patients in the medical facilities, it was a whole new thing. There was nobody to really take care of it. So Sarah Beverly was there at the footsteps of all the nutrition programs. And later on, when the Jewish state would be established, she was there trying to make sure all the children from the kindergartens till the high school and all the patients in every medical facility in the entire Israel would be given the necessary food, wouldn't be given the wrong food according to their treatment system, and the kids would be given enough nutrition, enough vitamins, and everything. So she was there at the footsteps of it. So, and I believe she was the cornerstone, that ensured the health and the strength of the children of the very, very newborn Jewish state. And yet, well, it's sort of a boring story, maybe in a way. So she didn't fight, at war. She didn't save, the kids from a Polish ghetto, but she did help so many children and generations of families survive. So for me, she is a hero. So she is a remarkable Jewish woman. And not at all boring. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ronnie, Kari, everyone. Okay. One more woman, Dvorah Baron. For some reason, I forgot to put her name in here. So Dvorah Baron, she was a poet. It's like, on the one hand, I'm talking about, the women in the army. On the other hand, they also had something else, some other hobbies, some other interesting side of their personality. She was the start of what has become a career as nutritionist. Yes, Risa, in a way, yes. Well, she had some really basic, she had to of course, think about some really basic things, just to make sure people don't starve and people don't ruin their health. Yeah, this is also true, but you're right. She would have been making really, really a fortune probably being a nutritionist now, given into account by how much they charge. This is true. Okay, so speaking of another woman, so Dvorah Baron. Well, remember I mentioned Hamda ben Yehuda, right? The woman of the person who almost resuscitated Hebrew as a language and made people speak it again, and it became the official language further on of the new Jewish state. But of course, much later. So yes, Dvorah Baron is actually considered one of the first writers and poems in Hebrew. Dvorah Baron immigrated from the, well, it's like she would come and go, but she made Aliyah to, well, Palestine still in the Ottoman times, and she was born not far from Minsk, which at that point, now it's in Belarus, but well, back then it was still the part of the Russian Empire. From a very, very small pale settlement called Uzda. That's like 50 kilometers from Minsk. She was from a religious family. However, unlike many religious families, she was given the very good education, just like her brothers. Of course, a traditional Jewish family, many, many children. Dvorah Baron. Oh, I put it here. Oh, okay. So now you see her name, Dvorah Baron. So you see the years of her life. And thanks to this, while she also was present, there were a lot less obligations for women when it gets to, let's say, going to synagogue and different customs and traditions and rituals, because women were mostly concentrated on the household and making sure in the household things are done, in the kosher way and everything, and raising children. But she was allowed to come to synagogue as often as she could, together with her brother. But she would be, of course, staying in Ezrat Nashim, which was a small division. Well, it was a sort of the sort of a wall that would separate the men's half of the synagogue from the women's section. And she would be listening to Hebrew language at that point, because Hebrew was the language of the service, and she would. Well, it would sink in. She would soak everything like a sponge. So Yiddish, then Hebrew, and also about 5 other languages that she could speak. Later on, when she immigrated to Palestine, she would first find a job as a journalist, but she always had this flair for writing, and she always, well, thanks to her education, of course. This is also, there are quite a lot of photographs, by the way, so you can Google for them. She was quite a beautiful woman and an interesting character. She always would be writing, and well, since she observed like her mom being the head of being predominantly in the household, and she saw many other girls who would not actually be given this much education, who wouldn't be attending any other classes but religious studies, and she saw those girls. She saw those girls in her pale of settlement, and in other settlements that she saw, and then also coming to Palestine, she saw the lives of women in these small communities and very secluded communities that the Jews had to live in. First of all, because it was the Ottoman land, and things were, the communities had to protect themselves. They would not even assimilate between the communities at some point. Well, of course, things would change further on, but still. And she saw it, and she saw how women actually had to struggle. Many women would, let me return for a moment, and then there will be one more woman to talk about. So we're still talking about Dvorah Baron for a few minutes. And she would be writing the stories in Hebrew. When she emigrated, she realized that there was one more language that would be also understandable not only for the Ashkenazi communities, which was Yiddish, right? And if you want to know more about Yiddish, then definitely join me and my husband in 1 hour from now for the tour of the Yiddish songs. It's going to be about it's not going to be a language language class, but it's going to be a singing class in a way, maybe. And of course we're going to be sharing stories, like culture specific things, and some history as well, but that's a bit different story, so it's in 1 hour from now. But anyway, and she knew that this would be the way for the future state. So the language has been reborn, and this would be the language that would unite all the Jews on this land. And she chose to write in Hebrew, and she chose to write about women. She knew she wasn't the only woman at that point. There were many women who would be suffering from inequality, and they would be underestimated. Sometimes, of course, there were cases of violence, many cases. Sometimes even the inner conflicts in those women. I remember there was a story, I actually read it, called Liska. Well, like, you really have to consider twice if you want to read it. Let's say if, it's going to be, it's rough. Well, just make sure you are ready for some really hard reading. But this story tells about how women were ashamed of themselves because there was a woman, she was suffering. Well, she just had felt this sexual drive, and she had to punish herself for it. And there were many women who had to punish, young women, young girls who had to punish themselves for it, because they were not allowed to feel what they were feeling, because the community and the religion and the way they lived, they were not allowed to feel it. And there are many stories about that, right? And she was among the very, very first women who actually would speak about it. And it goes really brutal there, but those were something unheard of beforehand. And the language is fascinating. The short stories that she wrote, you read them as if they were just diary entries, or the letters. There is the genre of sort of the letters that the diary entries, the diary prose. Interesting, very poignant, very sharp language, and many of the editors in chief that would be reading her short stories, they actually thought that Dvora Baron was a pseudonym, and it was a man writing under a woman's pseudonym, but it wasn't the case. So Dvora Baron is definitely one of the very first and groundbreaking also writers of Palestine of pre-state literature. Outstanding, absolutely outstanding. Patriarchal system it had a lot of damage on the girls, and it's not something that would be really told about. So I'm not here to criticize the way the Jewish women should be raised, or Jewish kids should be raised, but it is an issue, and it had to be brought up. And she had the guts, she had, maybe you forgive me if I say she had the balls to talk about it, right? So this might be the context in which I can use this expression. But sorry if it's a bit too harsh, but I believe she had something, she had this in her. Okay. And just one more moment. Hava Shapiro. Well, look at this hair. Unfortunately, there are not too many photographs of her, but at least something. Deborah, thank you so much. Yes, of course. I mean, again, like, I chose the stories and I chose the Jewish women, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to sugarcoat things about certain side of things. Of course not. I'm here to talk about the culture and just stories that did matter for those women, and the things that actually happened back in those days, and they created the sort of the context of those times. So yeah, I believe it's something we should really talk about. So okay, So Hava Shapira, she is sometimes called mother of all living, like Kam Hol Hai, like mom of everything that is alive, so mom of all living. So she is also one of the founding mothers, right? So we have founding fathers, so the founding mothers of Hebrew literature. She left about hundreds of different publications, and it wasn't only about fiction. It was about philosophy. It was about educational literature as well, criticism, like literary criticism, many things. So in a way, she was sort of a philosopher. This is true. And it's really hard to say that a girl like that could become a sort of a philosopher and literary critic and a scholar. But yes, she was. Not too many photographs, probably a few. She came from the territory of modern day Ukraine, pale again from the Pale of Settlement. And unlike many girls in her Pale of Settlement, she was given perfect education. She studied about 6 languages. As for Dvara Baran, I'm not sure how many she knew, probably less, but I also remember there was language studies. But she could speak at least 6 languages fluently. Can you imagine? So it's Hava Shapiro. Sometimes you can just read her name spelled as Hava, but it should be Hava Shapiro. And so just like I told you, so she was not only she was a philosopher, but she actually had a PhD in journalism. So a philosopher, critic, a writer, a scholar, and a journalist with a PhD. So sometimes, well, of course, you might have heard the name of Chaim Bialik, outstanding Hebrew poet, and then the Israeli poet, Sokolov, operetts, right? So she's compared very much to those founding fathers of Israeli Hebrew language and Israeli literature. And she actually is a pioneer of Hebrew women's literature. Again, so just one of those, such as Dvora Baran and Hava Shapiro. So these are the 2 women that studied a lot and had enough guts to talk about how women lived in Pale settlements, how much inequality there was in the family, how they were mistreated, how many conflicts there were even between the communities. She didn't sugarcoat things, and she also studied it as a journalist. She would brought these things to attention as a journalist, and she would spread word about it. She worked for several newspapers, and she was also the journalist who wouldn't be scared to go and to study some subjects that women normally would not be talking about, would not be writing about, or also the topics that kind of one might consider wouldn't be interesting for women. But she was there, and she was one of those women. Like, it was really unheard of back then to divorce. Like, you can't divorce in Judaism, you can't divorce even in religious families. Divorce is possible, it happens. She divorced her husband. Unfortunately, well, she also had to leave her son. So she had a son, and she had to leave the son. Later on, she would be engaged in an affair with a married man, and she was there to leave everything for him. She actually wanted to be with him, but he didn't take that decision, so he changed his mind. So they left, and she stayed alone till the end of her life and spent her entire life concentrated on her career and spreading the word about the life of women in Palestine. And she traveled all over Europe. She would be writing about the communities. She would be spreading the word within the communities. So yes, she's definitely one of those women who also tried to raise awareness of lack of education for women's education in the families. And luckily, her name is also connected with the names I mentioned in the beginning of the tour, such as Rebecca Fachner, for example, who helped. Rebecca Fachner, if you remember her, she came after numerous pogroms. She managed to immigrate to the States, and because she was given a good enough education, both religious and secular, she would be helping the girls that came with their families that hadn't been given enough education. She would be educating them and preparing them for the life in the new world, in the Western world, and making sure they would have enough education that would help them then study in college and just in their life. And Hava Shapiro was also one of those women that helped raise awareness of the women's lives, of the inequalities, and well, I believe this is something that also she would be the one who would make many women ask themselves some questions that they probably hadn't even dared to ask. So these are the women that I wanted to talk about today. Again, this is purely my choice of women to talk about, and no logic behind it, just the importance and their heritage. On next Friday, it's going to be facts are facts, and we should be aware of them. Yes, this is true, Carrie. You're right. So I'm not here to sugarcoat things. Also, I mean, we have to be aware of those things. So it wasn't life wasn't a bed of roses for me, for women in general back in those days. Even nowadays, we have to fight for what we actually should have. So yeah, it's true. And man, I'm very sorry first for saying this, but since you understood and you kind of acknowledge all these things. So next Friday is going to be my last episode about the remarkable Jewish women. I could really go for like every week because this list is endless, and thanks to Women's International Zionist Organization and the National Library of Israel, it's endless. There is so much to talk about. But I'm thinking I'm going to go with 4 episodes. On Friday, my son is going to join me as well. He wanted to talk about one woman in his life, one Jewish woman in his life, really outstanding. And also in an hour from now, me and my husband Misha are throwing a concert of Yiddish songs for you. Then tomorrow in the afternoon, not very convenient time, but still, there's going to be my anniversary in Israel tour. So the 1 year since my aliyah to Israel, a very personal tour. You can ask me questions. I will be sharing many stories. So if the weather is all right, I'll be taking you to the promenade in Tel Aviv along the Mediterranean. If the weather is bad, we're probably going to have a beer or something and just have a chit chat at a nice place in a nice location in Tel Aviv. And then I'll rush to my studies. I have a test tomorrow. Every Sunday I study, but my husband's going to take over tomorrow evening with this tour about the history of Jewish diaspora. Thank you for your interest in the subject. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for, just being here to learn some new things. And again, I had to repeat some of the things, but I believe it's who speaks English? Renee. Oh, my son, he understands a lot more than he can say. And since he is now in Israel, we're not pushing too much, in terms of English. So he's actually, I think he's going to speak some Hebrew, which you might find really fun. But he actually speaks Hebrew better than I do. So I don't know, it's fascinating what's happening with kids when they are in the environment. And so yeah, this will be it. We have to rehearse, and my voice is a little bit too low, but I'll just gonna be some, back vocals, and my husband's gonna do the work, and I'll be there managing. Everything is shared and everything works. So I'm not sure which language my son is going to speak, and I'll be there helping him every step of the way. It was his idea. He wanted to join just for several minutes to share the story. Anyway, this would be it. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for all the tips. Means a lot. Thank you for appreciating the time and efforts that I spent in the research. Thank you everyone, and see you very very soon in less than an hour from now. And thank you for following me, because I see some new followers, which is great. And many more tours are coming your way. On the 1st of April, I'll be running a pre-recorded tour of a wonderful exhibition in the Ethnography Museum in St. Petersburg about the life of the Jewish diaspora in the Russian Empire before the revolution of 1917. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and bye-bye.